Hi guys, I hope you're well and welcome to episode 139 of the James Layton Fitness Podcast. Now within this specific podcast I'm going to be sharing my own personal journey breaking free of clean eating. So you've all heard of clean eating before, you probably know the premise around it. Essentially you're focusing on just single ingredient whole food, and this is my own personal story of breaking free of clean eating, and this is why I'm so passionate against this clean eating mindset, because of the personal journey I went through, whereas essentially felt like I was boxed in, where I wasn't going to social occasions. I felt like I had to eat every 2 to 3 hours. I was bringing Tupperware containers every time I went on social occasions or every time I went out of the house, and it was a terrible place to be. And I'm sharing this story because I don't want you to go through this same experience, because I'm telling you right now, it's a huge weight off your shoulders when you appreciate that you can have some processed food in moderation and still achieve your fat loss and muscle building goals. You don't have to eat every 2 to 3 hours. You can go on social occasions. You don't have to bring your Tupperware container everywhere, because otherwise it can, if I'm honest, take over your life. And that's actually what happened to me in my late teens and early 20s. Okay, so I'll go back right at the beginning of the story and discuss my personal experience, and then I'll explain how I found a better way to achieve my fat loss and muscle building goals, and I'll explain a little bit more detail of how you can apply that to yourself. So essentially, towards the end of school, when I was about 16, we joined the gym. We went to balance. Me and my best mates, probably because we wanted to get big, to attract girls. That was probably the main goal at that particular time. We then, most of us who joined the gym at that particular time, also went to sixth form, which was from 17 to 18 at Thorpe St Andrews School, which is the school I went to. As I started getting really into fitness, trying to build muscle and lose body fat, I got results pretty quickly, and that's pretty typical for especially young males who join the gym. Typically, the first 6 months of weight training, you'll build quite a significant amount of muscle mass, just because you're new to weight training. The stimulus is new, and therefore you'll build muscle very quickly. And because of those initial results, it therefore made me want to get even better results, and that meant me kind of doing my research with my nutrition and really kind of doing as much research as possible online. And this is where I started to really get hooked on this kind of clean eating mindset. In my head, I thought I had to eat, as I mentioned, every 2 to 3 hours. These are the sorts of meals I will be making every single day. It's quite funny because at sixth form we had a teacher called Mr. Tranfield. He was my economics and business teacher, and he'd always laugh at me because every time I came in for lunch, he knew exactly what I was going to have, and that was chicken, brown rice, broccoli, maybe some tomato sauce poured on there as well, and I'd just have the same meal over and over. So essentially I'd have that meal twice. So it would be in a Tupperware container. I'd have half at break times. That could have been like 10:30, I can't remember exactly, and then at lunchtime maybe 1 o'clock. And then when I got home, I'd probably have something, maybe some whey protein, some oats, and then for dinner it could be rice and chicken again. So again, very bland, and you can just see how the issue starts to arise, where you're just focusing on these small groups of foods, but in your head you think you have to eat every 2 to 3 hours. So this started getting probably worse and worse, probably ironically as I got better results in the gym. The reason why is I was just being consistent. If you're consistent in the gym and then also eating sufficient protein, etc., eating relatively well, you're going to get better results. And because I was training frequently, I was always going to get pretty good results. However, during this period, this is where I started to almost dread social occasions. This sounds absolutely terrible, but even if friends were to ask me to go away, where you're away from food for 5-6 hours, I'd really feel the dread whenever that would come up. So sometimes I'd just avoid the social occasions, or I would make an effort to bring, could be chicken and rice again, or I'd bring like whey protein, oats, terrible, or some fruit along with me. So I'd always have to bring something along with me, even to the point I remember specifically, this is probably in my late teens, maybe early 20s, and I was seeing this girl. I remember each time I go see her, I'd make sure I pack some whey protein and some oats, maybe some peanut butter as well, and that would be in my car. I remember driving a Fiat Punto at the time, but I could never go and see her without having my food or a meal around, just because, like I said, in my head I thought I had to eat every 2 to 3 hours. And here was the turning point. This is when I started to do a little bit more research, and at that point I think I hit a little bit of a plateau in my training. So I thought I maybe needed a coach or someone to kind of help me, and I found someone online, and I basically had that individual coach me. It's quite similar to what I do now, where I basically create people nutrition and training programs and then essentially coach them to their goals. So they could have goals of fat loss, and I'll work with them for a period of time, and you're working alongside them, you're making manipulations to nutrition and training plan until they reach their goals. And it's when I was with this coach that I started to understand things much better. He said to me that you didn't have to eat every 2 to 3 hours. You could, as long as you were meeting the daily protein, carbohydrate, fat and calorie targets, you can essentially let a meal frequency that you choose, you could choose that meal frequency and then just make sure you meet those daily nutrition targets. Very similar to what I teach now. And that was a huge game changer for me already, because it was a big shift from going from eating every 2 to 3 hours, maybe at least 6 meals per day, to just having 4 or sometimes 3 meals per day. Well, I think it was usually 4, but even that was a game changer, because I just felt like there was less stress to eat too frequently. 4 meals per day is relatively manageable for most people. So that was kind of the first real shift, and I got some better results by following that approach. We had some nutrition targets, and then he was making manipulations to increase calories when I reached a plateau. Because my goal was muscle building at that particular time, he was kind of ramping up the calories, and lo and behold, I started to make progress again. When I had the plateau, he upped the calories, started to gain weight again, started to gain strength, which is what you want in muscle building phase. And I thought, wow, this is incredible, because at that time I'd qualified to be a personal trainer, probably in my late teens, and this was kind of game changing information for me, that you could manipulate your calories to achieve a certain result. And that was kind of the first big shift for me. And then as I started promoting myself more online, at the time Twitter and Facebook were really the main kind of social media platforms you'd promote your personal training business, I stumbled across my second kind of main mentor, and that guy's name's Joseph Agu. And if you Google him, find his blog, he's got some absolutely amazing content, because it's all evidence-based, and he's also worked for the English Institute of Sport, and he's worked with GB athletes. He really is a top level guy, and you should definitely follow him. And it was really lucky that I stumbled across him, and I can't remember how he started following me. I started following him, and it was quite funny initially, because I think I was posting kind of essentially not evidence-based tweets really, and he sent me a little message to say, I think, where did you find this information out, because it was obviously incorrect, and he pointed me in the right direction. And then I looked into him a little bit further and noticed that he did kind of online consultations where you'd pay a fixed fee for an hour and you'd speak to him for an hour, and he could help me with my learning as such. He can kind of point me in the right direction. That really was a game changer for me, because he started to open my eyes up to more of the evidence-based practitioners, people like Alan Aragon, Lyle McDonald, Eric Helms, Brad Schoenfeld, all these big names, James Krieger, Joseph Agu himself as well, all these big names that had a completely different attitude to what I was following before. Before I was just following the quote-unquote bro science, this is what the biggest guy in the gym says, whereas now Joseph guided me towards more of an evidence-based crowd where everything had context. I think that's probably the biggest mindset shift you have when you start reading this evidence-based stuff, is it's not black and white, it all depends on the context. So for example, a great example of this is nutrient timing, which is very important for an endurance trainer that trains twice per day, because speed of glycogen synthesis is very important for that individual. But for those who are just training once per day, weight training, it's not as important. So that's a great example where it's not black and white, oh, nutrient timing is very important. Well, it kind of depends. It's not to say it's not important, but it's more important for the people that train twice per day as opposed to once per day. So gone on a slight tangent, but anyway, Joseph really taught me the evidence-based approach, and lo and behold, that was what I was starting to learn from the previous coach when I had these daily nutrition targets. I was nailing them. I was letting my personal preference dictate what food sources I had. I could have some quote-unquote junk in moderation. As long as I met those daily nutrition targets, I could still achieve my goals. And this was the next big shift, where I started having some quote-unquote bad food or some processed food in moderation, as long as I stayed within my daily nutrition targets, and I was still achieving my goals. I was still achieving my fat loss goals or muscle building goals, whatever goal I was achieving at that specific time. And that was another big shift for me, because now I could still go on social occasions. I could have some crappy food in moderation. I could have family meals on Sunday, etc., and not feel like, oh my god, I'm going to gain all this fat, or I'm going to lose all my muscle gains, etc., which is kind of what I was thinking prior to having this knowledge. So there's the story, the background around it, and that's where my knowledge has evolved. And since then I've really gone in depth on this topic quite a lot in the past. I think this was actually my first ever podcast. I called it the clean eating myth. So here's how this can apply to you. Some really key principles I want you to take away. So with regards to clean eating, you need to, instead of looking at foods in isolation, you need to actually look at the diet as a whole. No food is good or bad in isolation, but there's good or bad diets. So that therefore means if your whole diet is just made up of sugar and processed food, obviously that's not a good thing. But if the majority of the diet is made up from single ingredient whole food, with lots of fruits and vegetables, you're having lots of good quality protein sources, you're meeting some well set up daily protein, carbohydrate and fat targets, there's no reason why you can't have some quote-unquote processed food in moderation. So a good way to look at this, if you have 80 to 90% of your food intakes from single ingredient whole food, and then the other 10-20% from whatever you like. Again, going back to that eating every 2 to 3 hours. In regards to fat loss, it does not matter how many meals you're eating throughout the day. In regards to muscle building, it's worth having at least 3 meals per day, just because you want to maximize muscle protein synthesis. So again, that should take a big weight off your shoulder if you think you should be eating every 2 to 3 hours. Now, there's another caveat here, and it goes back to the fat loss phase. Now, within the fat loss phase, a real issue a lot of people have is hunger, and therefore, again, you don't want to take my comments out of context and have too much sugary food or processed food, because typically it's not as satiating as more single ingredient whole food, more fibrous vegetables, things like this, things that are foods that are higher in fiber, typically keep you fuller for longer. So therefore, within the context of the fat loss phase, you really do want to still mainly have single ingredient whole food. Again, you can have a small amount of processed food in moderation, but you could probably do this more within a gaining phase. When you're in a position when you're in a calorie surplus, you've got lots more calories available to you, then you could have a little bit more processed food. Again, the ratio is probably going to stay the same, 80-20, 80% typically single ingredient whole food and 20% processed food. But because your calories are high, you can ultimately have more processed food. And one of the big game changers with regards to this topic is adherence changes dramatically. Because you can have some processed food in moderation, it allows you to stick to the diet for longer, whether it's fat loss or muscle building. You're not having to feel like you're going to binge or go off the plan. That's where clean eating really does suffer, because there's only so long you can go without having some treats or whatever, and you'll just go off the rails completely. You'll have one day an absolute binge, and that can really have an impact on your progress. But if you're having small amounts of processed food throughout the week, it just means that you're not craving and wanting to binge all the time, which is quite typical for clean eaters. Another big thing, it just creates a bad relationship with food. If you're looking at food as good and bad, it really does create a bad, like I said, when I was going through that phase, it was terrible, because every time I had something I should have had, I felt extremely guilty. Whereas this, which is what's called if it fits your macros or flexible dieting, this allows you to have some of these foods, still achieve your goals, not have any impact on your health benefits, because you're still having mainly single ingredient whole food, lots of fruits and vegetables. It just allows you to not feel guilty when you're having these foods, allows you to have a much better relationship with food. So hopefully this is making sense. Like I said, this was without question the biggest game changer for my personal kind of fat loss and muscle building journey. Honestly, if you've been through anything like this past, you know it's not particularly pleasant when you're just boxed in eating the same foods, feel like you have to eat every 2 to 3 hours, bringing Tupperware containers when you're meeting up with friends is not how you want to be living your life. So hopefully this has been useful. Hopefully this has been an eye-opener if you haven't already applied this. As I mentioned, I've done similar podcasts in the past, but I probably haven't gone into too much depth on my personal story. So hopefully that's been useful. Thank you very much for listening. I'll look forward to speaking to you next week. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton fitness.co.uk, so you'll tab at the top of the page called free ebook, and you can download that immediately. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Thank you very much.